Okay, going live. Today we are reading chapter 20 of Paola Santiago and the River of Tears by Taylor K. Mejia. The title of chapter 20 is Someone Get This Paranormal Beast a Breath Mint. This chapter starts on page 227. Are we ready? Okay. Pao followed the beam for what felt like an hour without stopping, wanting to make sure she left the firelight of camp far behind before she rested. Fear and doubt were creeping into her mind like a fog, stealing the spring from her steps, urging her to turn back, but she kept going. Finally, when she was sure she was alone in the field, she sank to the ground on her trembling legs and put her head in her hands. What had she done? Leaving the protection of the camp behind, taking the key, leaving the niños defenseless. Pao's breath came in shorter and shorter gasps, and she struggled to regain control. This far away from Marissa's capable attitude and Naomi's attack power, Pao felt impossibly small and defenseless. The sky seemed to agree with her, opening up completely for the first time, revealing its distant, indifferent stars in glimmering clusters you could almost never see from Silver Springs. Pao tried to feel comforted by the constellations, as she had so often before, but her problems were no longer those of an almost seventh grader, stuck in a tiny apartment with her superstitious mom. Before her world had been too small. The stars had encouraged her with the promise of more. Now her world was too big, too full of impossible problems that rested on only her shoulders. Now, though she was reluctant to admit it, she wanted nothing more than to return to her old life. But there was no going back, and the clock didn't wait for uncertainty. The solstice began tonight, and from the moment midnight hit, she had 24 hours to get into the rift, rescue her friends, save the world, and get back out. The moon was sinking. Midnight was coming too fast, and Pao still didn't know any more than she had when she'd left camp. Doesn't matter, she told herself, rubbing her tired eyes and getting back to her feet. Adventures she was learning weren't really about what you knew. They were about what you were willing to do. In the shopping bag on her shoulder, the Florida water bottle lay on the bottom, the sole item remaining. Pao reached in and pulled it out. The clone hadn't worked on the monsters, but Pao remembered Dante splashing it on them before they left the apartment. It had made her skin burn when the apartment filled with green light. She'd never liked its scent, but she sprinkled it on herself. Anyways, surprised to find she didn't mind it as much as she used to. It smelled like Senora Mata. Her mom's cards, Dante's room, it smelled like home. The reminder of it made her feel stronger. Maybe home wasn't an apartment with burn marks in the shag carpeting and a fridge full of condiments and tinctures. Maybe it wasn't candles and rosaries and depictions of saints. Maybe home was something you carried with you, something you could call on, even if you couldn't go back to it. It was with that comforting thought, the smell of the Florida water in her nose and the flashlight warm in her hand, that Pao forged ahead toward whatever was next. The key's beam changed direction, seemingly at random, but Pao had learned her lesson about underestimating it, so she followed, even when it made no sense. She walked in circles. She doubled back. She went left for what felt like hours, only to take 3 rights in a row. But the landscape kept changing, even when the path seemed the same, and soon the cacti were growing taller and more spindly, their silhouettes looking skeletal and creepy against the starless night sky. How long had it been since she and Dante had first wandered into the cactus fields? Pao wondered. How long since the Mano Pachano had let her go? How long since she'd yelled at her best friend for wanting to be a hero? How long since he'd kissed her and she'd lost him? Pao didn't have the answers, so she walked. She followed the flashlight when it bent around her body, urging her back the way she'd just come. She walked because she didn't know where Dante was, or Emma, or if they were still alive. She walked because there was, even now, something angry and sharp inside her. Something that had been born with the first dream she'd ever had about the riverbank. Something that might have been responsible for Emma's disappearance and all that had come crashing into their lives after that. She walked until the sky started to lighten and the flashlight's beam began to fade. Her legs were just starting to burn with the strain when she heard it Somewhere up ahead, a low growl, low enough for Pao to imagine it was coming from a very large animal. Her heart sped up, beating so hard she was afraid the beast would be able to hear it. If this key was really on her side, shouldn't it have steered her away from danger? When she used the flashlight as a compass, it didn't seem to drain her, but as a weapon, it definitely would. If Marisa's story was any indication, she could only risk using it once more, and she'd need one heck of a light blast from it to get past the ahogados and into the rift. So whatever monster was here, she would have to face it with just her knife and what little combat training she'd picked up. As if on cue, the creature growled again, and Pao heard a scratching sound, too. She stopped walking and drew her dagger, pointing the flashlight at the ground and turning in slow circles so she wouldn't be surprised when the beast came close enough for her to see. In that moment, for the first time since she was a little girl, Pao almost wished she had a father. Someone to teach her where the thumb goes when you throw a punch, inside or outside, she wasn't sure which, or what to do if a bear attacks you in the woods. But today it was just Pao, who had been trained by her mom in ghostly drowning and dismemberment, and when she was too young to understand what they were. Get it together, she told herself. This is hardly the time to be waxing nostalgic about childhood. Up ahead, there was a fallen cactus so ancient that it husked looked as hard as rock. Do cacti petrify? Pao wondered. But she reined herself in again. Biological queries about the flora and fauna of the area weren't top priority right at this moment either. The growl sounded again, and now that she was closer, Pao could hear an echoey quality to it. Either that, or there was more than one of whatever it was. She tightened her grip on her knife, remembering the way that ahogado had shattered when she'd stabbed it. If she was lucky, it would be just as effective on the monster lurking here. For a second, Pao thought of the way Marisa must have looked standing in front of the rift with Franco, holding her knife futilely when her world was about to come crashing down. You'll be way better than that, Pao told herself. But the idea was too hollow to be much of comfort. The growling intensified, reacting to her footsteps, though she tried to keep them as quiet as she could. Maybe this creature had exceptional hearing, like some kind of mutant bird or rodent. Pao shuddered, but she didn't stop walking forward. This was what she had signed up for. She would just have to hope she was equal to it. The cactus husk was near enough to kick, and there was no doubt about it. The growling was coming from inside, but now that she was practically on top of it, the sound had changed. It was more of a yelp than a growl. Maybe the creature was in trouble. Regardless, she didn't let her guard down. There were plenty of terrifying things that yelped, weren't there? The yelping turned into whimpering. Pao walked around the fallen cactus until she'd reached its bottom. The thing had to be 10 feet long. Did the weird magic energy in the field make them grow abnormally tall? She was 2 yards from the cactus, then 1, then just a couple of feet. Pao's pulse was kicking like a bass drum across the entire surface of her skin. Was this it? Was she about to die? Right now? Before she ever reached the rift? Before she ever found out that if she was possessed by some kind of terrible magic? When she was 3 steps away, the creature fell silent. Whatever it was, it knew Pao was there. 2 steps. The darkness inside the hollow cactus husk was absolute. Pao couldn't see a thing. 1 step. Wait, was something glimmering in there? It looked like an emerald. Pao knelt down at the opening just before the yawning tunnel's entrance exploded in a whirl of fur and teeth and glowing green eyes. She screamed, falling onto her butt with an undignified thump, swinging fists and shopping bag and knife and flashlight indiscriminately as the thing finally made contact. But it didn't sink its terrifying fangs into her flesh, or peck at her with some mutated beak, or hiss at her before it wrapped its body around her torso. In fact, when Pao calmed down enough to realize she wasn't being devoured, she realized the thing, which was barely bigger than the neighborhood cat back at home, seemed to be licking her. "Ew! Get off!" she shrieked, scrabbling back across the dirt in a sort of panicking crab walk as the thing bounded after her, its black tongue hanging out of its mouth in a goofy way totally unbefitting a terrifying paranormal beast. With a foot or 2 of space between them, space the creature was trying its hardest to close as Pao held it off with her foot. She could see it more clearly. Its fur was midnight black and glossy, though it was dirty and ragged in places, and it seemed to have several cactus spines poking out of its body. Its eyes were green and glowing like the other rift monsters, but those were round and curious, almost playful. Along its back were two ridges of tentacle-like protrusions, barely the length of Pao's pinky finger. Though it bore little resemblance to the one that had almost taken off her face the day before, there was no doubt about it. This was a chupacabra. Correction, Pao thought as the creature finally overcame her sneaker to barrel back into her lap. A chupacabra puppy. Get off me, she screeched again, as the pup resumed its enthusiastic and incredibly smelly licking of every inch of exposed skin. But her heart wasn't really in the scolding. In fact, with its big feet and playful yelps and still floppy ears, the thing was actually sort of cute. Okay, she said, scratching behind its ears, avoiding a particularly scaly spot in favor of the familiar dog-like fur. It was definitely a he, she decided. Not nearly enough survival instinct to be a female. It's okay, little guy. What are you doing out here all alone? As if in response, the chupacabra puppy howled a sad little howl. Woo! Pao's heart leaped into her throat. No! She said, having a sudden vision of a pack of bloodthirsty void beasts bearing down on her, thinking she'd stolen their baby. Shh! It's okay. She gathered the floppy thing in her arms and held him close to her chest, making shushing, soothing sounds as he wiggled himself into a more comfortable position. Shh, 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 shh. Before 2 minutes had passed, he was fast asleep. Pao leaned back against the petrified cactus, which thankfully had lost most of its spine, and let the puppy sleep. He was hideous, she thought. Dangerous. A monster. But he trusted her, and right now that was enough to make up for the rest. Isn't that what everyone wants? Pao asked herself. To be loved, even though they're kind of a monster? The thought should have made her scoff. Instead, it almost made her cry. Who cares, she said out loud. There's no one here. In her arms, the chupacabra puppy snorted in his sleep. Well, except for you. Pao had come with a list of puppy names a mile long when she was trying to convince her mom to get her a dog. But right now, she couldn't remember a single one of them. And plus, those names had been for cute yellow or brown puppies from the pound, not a demon hell beast from malevolent magic void. As she racked her brain, all she could think of was the only dog that had ever lived in the Riverside Palace apartments. He'd been a massive Rottweiler named Spooky. And when he barked at all hours of the night, Dante's abuela used to scream down at him, "Cállate, bruto!" Pao had always giggled at how out of sorts it made Senora Mata, that barking dog. He hadn't been so bad, really, but Pao had always secretly thought Spooky was a terrible name for him. He was fearsome, and Spooky was not a fearsome name. Bruto, Pao said thoughtfully, stroking the little spot on his head where fur grew over the weird scales. Is that your name? Bruto? He cracked open at one eye, which glowed green, and then every muscle in him tensed joyfully as he resumed his enthusiastic looking. Okay, Pao said, standing up, laughing for the first time since Dante had disappeared. Bruto it is. Now come on, make yourself useful. Pao took out the flashlight and clicked it on, but Bruto was not a fan. He ran in circles around her, yipping and yapping the thing, growling at it like it was another animal, not just an inanimate object. What's the matter? She asked, shining the light at him. But of course, the beam continued to point to her left. Even at his yapping became more determined bark. You don't like it? Pao got down on her knees and offered the flashlight for Bruto to sniff. It's okay. But the creature refused to get near it. In fact, he backed away, his hackles rising, the tentacle-like thing on his back, waving like he was floating instead of standing on solid ground. Pao supposed it made sense. Bruto was from the void, and the flashlight was a magical key made to destroy the creatures from there. Fine, she said, standing back up. You don't have to like it, but we do have to use it. Come on. She oriented herself until the beam of light and her sneakers were pointing in the same direction. She was feeling almost rested and more hopeful. Maybe she could pull this off after all. Bruto lingered a few feet away, his green spine still waving as his eyes stayed narrowed in suspicion. For a moment, Pao wondered if he would follow her. Was the flashlight offensive enough to send him scurrying back into the cactus house for good? The prospect seemed almost unbearable, squeezing Pau's chest. Before she had thought she could do this by herself, but now there was no denying that it was nice not to be alone. I won't make you come with me, she said, her voice a little wobbly, but I would really like it if you did, okay? He cocked his head to one side, looking more like a real puppy than ever. Okay, here goes. Pau took a step behind her. Bruto whined. She took another step, and then another, her heart sinking more with each second. She didn't hear his little monster claws following. She was 25 paces, not that she was counting, away from him. Her heart somewhere near her left sneaker, when his constant whine became a high-pitched bark, and in a tiny cloud of dust, Bruto barreled into her ankles, panting and looking very pleased with himself. Good boy, Pau said, her big, genuine smile so out of practice it started to hurt her cheeks after a minute. Good boy, Bruto. With the puppy at her heels, Pau double-checked the flashlight and still smiling, continued on.